Okay, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. Um, we have we're in the fourth step. We have done a lot of work to get here. We have done our diagnosis of the problem in step one. We've recognized that we have this threefold malady made up of a physical allergy, a mental obsession, and a spiritual malady, and that we our problem is that we're powerless over this. We don't have the ability to fix ourselves. A sick mind cannot heal a sick mind. We cannot apply the same thinking process to get us out of a problem that got us into it in the first place. But we're not entirely screwed, because in the second step we're told good news. There is a power that can do for you what you couldn't do for yourself, and you can access that power by working these steps, by going through the rest of the steps. And so in step three, we made a decision to do just that. And in making that decision, we made some recognitions that we're no longer, at least for myself, I'm no longer in the secondary position thinking I'm in the primary position. I'm an actor on this stage, and I think I'm controlling everything, not only the other actors, but the inanimate objects, the lights, the curtains, everything. I control everything. And I had to recognize in that third step that that's not the case at all, that I am here as a messenger, that God is not my errand boy, that I am here to do his bidding. In fact, on page, where are we? On page 63, uh, begins with pointing out that on the previous page, we acknowledge that God was our director, God was our father, God was our principal. And we got that lineage, if you will, straight, that I'm in the secondary position, taking orders, taking my guidance from my creator. And on the top of 63 is a promise, is a great promise. And it's I don't know if I mentioned it at the time, but it is the gateway promise to all the promises that follow. And it starts off the page by saying, when we sincerely took such a position, and that position is, as I said, God is the director. He is the father. He is the principal. We're the agents. When we take that position, when we get straight about who's in charge here, all sorts of remarkable things happened. We had a new employer, so we've got a new boss in town. Being all powerful, he provided what we needed if, and here's the condition, here's our job description. When you get a new job, you get a new employer, you get a code of this is what you're expected to do at that job. And it tells us that our job is to keep close to him and perform his work well, not to give him orders of what we need him to do and want us to do. God isn't the least bit interested, I don't think, in what I want. I know he will take care of my needs if I just trust him enough to do that. So on this page, we made that promise, that gateway promise, that this is the way it's going to be from this point on. And if we can try and follow that through the rest of the steps, we can make it to that 12th step of a spiritual awakening as a result of doing that work. So we started out by taking a look at this the things that have been ruling, controlling, and dominating us up until this point. If God is to be our new director, well, who's been doing the directing up until now? Where are the orders been coming from? Who's been calling the shots up until now? Well, what I realized was that I couldn't identify a single emotional disturbance in my life that wasn't tied into one or all of the following three things. I'm angry as hell about something, scared to death about something, or I've done something and I want you to find out about it, and I'm filled with guilt and shame that you will. So that means that my life up until now has been ruled, controlled, and dominated by those angers. by those fears, by those sources of guilt and shame and remorse. And very often in our rooms, we kind of interchange the word anger with resentment as if they mean the same thing. And even Bill switches them around from time to time, and it can be confusing. But a resentment is to re-feel something. Re means to do again. Sentiment comes from the Latin word sentire, which means to do again. So the word resentment means to re-feel. I'm sorry, sentire, which means to feel. To re-feel something. We're re-feeling our angers. We're re-feeling our fears. We're re-feeling the sources of guilt and shame and remorse. That anger is a resentment, and so is fear, and so is guilt and shame and remorse. And I don't know if I mentioned it before, but if you think about it the right way, if you have a resentment now, it's a lie. It's not true. It's not true because it's something that happened in the past, or it's something that hasn't happened yet that we're looking at and planning out. We have our own plan about the way things are going to play out, our playbook. But if you have a resentment, understand it's a lie. It's not real, because God doesn't give us the tools to deal with tomorrow and yesterday. We are only equipped to deal with today. So if we are wrapped around thinking about things that haven't happened yet, or things that already have happened, it comes down to our unwillingness or inability to meet ourselves where we are, which is right here in the today. So if I'm not meeting myself in the today, I'm living in a lie. And I have to recognize that having resentments are lies. So what we did is we started to look at the anger portion of our resentment. We were given an assignment. The first one was to make a list of people, principles, and institutions with whom we were angry. And we just made a simple list of those names, just a list of names. And then we were given instructions to, next to those names, identify what they did to deserve a place on that list. What did that person do to deserve a special place in hell? I want him to burn forever in hell. That's why he's on the list. So what did that person do? Briefly, bullet points in that second column. First column is that list of names. Second column is what they did. Third column is what basic instinct of ours is hurt or threatened by what that person did. Hi, good to see you. What did they do to deserve a place on that list? I learned that I can't be angry at you unless you do something that specifically, deliberately hurts, threatens one of my basic instincts. Like imagine what each toe has a name. One toe is self-esteem, and the other one is pride, and the other one is security instincts, and that's physical security, emotional security, financial security. What toe did you step on that made me angry? See, anger doesn't just happen. I used to think anger was something like, I don't know, like love. It just happens, but it doesn't. I cannot be angry at you unless you did something that threatened or hurt one of those basic instincts. So in that third column, we're asked to identify what is it that we did? What toe is it that you stepped on? And then we were told about this third column that I'm sorry, that is the third column, this list of basic instincts. And then we were told about this final column. And there's an example on page 65 that tells us about those first three columns. And it doesn't actually show the next column, or in some cases, a fifth column. And there's a lot of misconceptions about that. And the best explanation that I've been able to come up with had to do with the cost of printing back in those days and the ability to not just simply turn a book on its side and start printing it horizontally, that it was not as easily done as it is today and was a much more costly process. And that's why they only gave an example of the 3 columns, but they mentioned the other columns. And too often at meetings, I hear people refer to those other columns in terms of what part did I play? Well, we don't play parts in this thing. If I played a part, that means you played a part. And if that's the case, then every time I retell it or rethink it, the part that you played gets bigger and more exaggerated. And the part that I play begins to shrink and almost disappear to the point where I can convince myself that I did absolutely nothing. And this person just came around and did that. So what we're looking for is not our mistake or not is not our part. We're looking for what mistakes we made. And if we take a look at the example once again on page 65, we have, say, Mr. Brown. Let's just take that first example. Mr. Brown, we're angry at him because of his attention to my wife. He told my wife of my mistress. He may get the job at the office. Now, if we look at that, what mistake did we make? Well, for one thing, he had a mistress, right? There's a mistake. It's not his fault. We did that. That's our mistake, is we had a mistress that put us in the position for that person to hurt us. And then it says he may get his job at the office. And a little further on down the list, we find out why. That in his anger towards his employer, he's been threatened to be fired because of his drinking on the job and padding the expense account. So his mistake was in having a mistress. His mistake in the other example was padding the expense account or drinking on the job. And those are those 4th column things. What mistake did we make? And as we look at those things in that 4th column, I think what we begin to see is almost a mirror. The things in column 2 that this person did that made us angry. If we turn that around and ask ourselves, well, did we ever do that to that person or to another person? We're going to find out that the mistakes that we made are the same things that made us angry in the first place. And then I mentioned last week that there are certain instances where there's almost another column that might be considered to be added in, and that has to do with abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse. We didn't play any part. We didn't make any mistake that brought that about. Somebody did that to us. So how do we deal with that? Joe and Charlie said that, well, you just leave that last column blank because you didn't make any mistakes. And I felt that that was not enough for me. It didn't really help me deal with the situation of abuse that I had gone through. And somebody at one of the early workshops I went to suggested to have will list. Andy, you want to put that up? I think it's 67. It helps me look at what part did I play in the resentment. I didn't make a mistake here. I didn't play a part in the incident, but any anger is made up of 2 things. It's made up of the thing that I'm angry about, but it's also at some point that thing that I'm angry about ended. I'm angry at this cousin who abused me between the ages of 9 and 14. but it stopped when I was 14. But every time I thought about it, every time I saw that person, heard that name, heard someone talk about abuse like that, my blood pressure would go up, my stomach would be in a knot. I would be participating in that part of my disease, that resentment. I'm re-feeling that anger. That person had nothing to do with it. That person ended what they did at when I was 14. For the next 40 years, I remained angry about it, which means I played a part in the resentment, the re-feeling of that situation. So the words that we picked out: have will, Havewill. What part did I play in this resentment? Well, I harbored it, meaning I held on to it. I gave it safe haven. I protected it. Picture like a harbor that's protected on each side. It's a safe haven. And I gave that resentment safe haven, which means I also allowed myself to have it. I never was able to say, and most of us as alcoholics are not very good at this, are not able to say, you know, what's done is done, the hell with it, it's in the past. I was never able to do that. So I allowed myself to have that. And I also felt victimized, that it didn't just happen, it happened to me, that it wasn't just something that happened to anyone, that I was targeted. So I was victim. I was a victim, and I also had expectations that somebody who loved me like that, because this was a person I looked up to as an older brother, would never do that to me. So I had expectations, and I also had expectations of myself, that if anybody did anything like that to me, I would let the world know. I'd put it on the front page of every newspaper, and I never did anything like that. I didn't say a word to anybody for 40, 50 years until I did my fourth step inventory. So I had expectations. I was felt like I was a victim. I allowed it. I harbored it. I built walls. I made it very difficult for people to get close to me because that cousin got close to me, and look what happened. So I built walls. I was irresponsible because I never told a soul about it, which means I put other people in my family in the line of fire. That same cousin babysat for my baby brother, my kid brother, and other younger kids in my family. And because I never said a word about it, I put them all in the line of fire. I was irresponsible. And I was irresponsible because of the next thing: I lied. I lied by omission. I never said a word about it to anybody else. I lied by omission. And I lacked prayer. I lacked prayer. I never went to God and said, can you help me with this? Can you relieve me with it? Never did it. So the point I'm making here is that there is something I did in these situations of abuse that allowed me to still have it and still feel it 30 and 40 years later, even if it's just a month later. We're talking about the resentment portion of that. So where do we put that? We put that in that fourth column, that final column. What mistakes did we make? Well, in this case, these are different kinds of mistakes that allowed me to have the resentment for years and years and years. Okay, Andy, you could take that down. Um, and then after we took a look at our actions, our angers rather, um, we were told that the next thing we needed to do was to look at our fears, make a list of fears. Um, I'm sorry, I keep getting a lot of texts in here. Let me just turn that off. I'm sorry. Um, we talked about um, how fear is this thread that runs through every part of our lives. And if you think about it, I don't think there's ever an emotional situation that didn't involve fear in one form or another, fear that I'm not going to get something I want, fear that I'm going to lose something I've got, or fear that I've done something and I'm afraid you're going to find out about it. So it's an evil thread that runs through so much of my life. So we started out by looking at our fears by making a short list on page 68. We are given very simple directions for fear. We start out by making a list of the things that we're afraid of. And I'm not necessarily talking about spiders, dentists, and clowns. I'm talking about things that are a little bit more serious, that are more irrational. Irrational meaning that they're lies. They're blown out of proportion. I think it's normal to have a certain fear of dentists. It's not a pleasurable experience to have them drill into the enamel of your teeth. But if your fear of dentists keeps you from ever going to a dentist, then by your very conduct, there it is. Andy's putting up the prompt list of different fears. Then your fear of that dentist kept you from ever going to a dentist, which means the reason why you were afraid, because you're going to have to go through pain and suffering, has been magnified tenfold. So there are a lot of different fears. And as we get older, I think we add to that list in terms of health issues and so on. So fear runs through every part of our life. So we're beginning by making a list. I am afraid of. Andy, if you'll give me the basic instructions for that review of fears, I think it's 68. There are very few directions for the fear inventory. Joe and Charlie used to talk about the fear inventory being done in columns, and I love them. And everything I know I learned from Joe and Charlie, but I don't see that in the book. And when I started working with my current sponsor, and I asked him, "Well, how do you do the fear inventory?" He looked at me like I had two heads and said, "What do you mean?" I do what it says to do on page 68. And when I looked at page 68, I felt, wait a minute, where did this page come from? This page was never in my book before. All of a sudden now my new sponsor tells me about it and it's here. And here's what it says to do. And it's so simple. First, it says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper. So I made a list. I am afraid of confrontation, intimacy, uh, uh, illness, fear of failure, etc. Nope, we stay on the other one. That's it. We can stay there. And then the instructions bill says on the third line on that page is we asked ourselves why we had them. And as I said before, there are three things that seem to run through all of these fears about not getting something we want or losing something we've got or being found out about something. But it comes down to something a little more basic than that. That the reason for our fears was because of reliance upon self, that I never turned over to God and asked God to help me get through that fear. I relied on my finite self rather than my infinite higher power. The power that got me to this point in my recovery can get me through this if I invite him in. So the reason why I have the fear is because of reliance upon finite self and not reliance upon my infinite higher power. And the book tells us that just to the extent that we act as God would have us, just to the extent that we do, not talk about, but as we do, does he match our calamity with serenity? Does he grant us chaos, relieve us of our chaos, and grant us peace of mind? If you remember the previous chapter, we agnostics, remember how it ended? When we drew near to him, he revealed himself to us. And that's exactly what we're being reminded of here. If we ask to help us, to help God give us the courage to get through the fear, we will get the necessary courage that we need. So Bill then tells us how to do that. That if we're on this basis of trusting and relying upon God, we have to ask. We have to first ask God to relieve us of this fear and to replace it with what he would have us be. And what would God have us be? Courageous. In all cases, courageous. The opposite of fear is not faith, it's courage. With repeated acts of courage, we develop that faith and that confidence. But it starts with courage. So we ask God to remove our fear of whatever it is. I'm afraid of picking up that phone, asking this girl out on a date, or I'm afraid of asking this person for a job raised, or whatever it is that I'm afraid of doing. I ask God to direct my strength, to give me the courage to do what it is that I need to do. I seek God's help and apply all of the willpower at my command to act courageously. And you know what happens? The book tells us at once we commence to outgrow fear. It doesn't mean we are relieved of fear. The terminology is important. He says, at once we commence. Commence infers a process that the more I do this, the more I will get rewarded. And I will outgrow it because outgrow is also a representative of time, of action. It doesn't happen overnight. So, Andy, if you could move that up a bit. No, there we go, right there. That it doesn't say that we're free of fear. It promises we have commenced, we have embarked on a course of action to do so. And that process will be refined and matured in the related work that we're going to do in the seventh step. The third, the fear inventory just is that. It inventories, it identifies those fears and gives us a way to start to outgrow that fear. By the time we get to our seventh step, we're going to be applying that same process to all of our defects of character, but we're starting right here with fear. And that, I think, is as far as we got last week. We're now on the bottom of page 68. Now about sex. Many of us need an overhauling here. And you know, when you overhaul a car engine, you break it down into this every little bolt, every little nut, every little piece in that car has to be accounted for, has to be in fully operational condition. And that's what we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at the way we think about sex. We're not talking about mechanics. We're talking about the way we think about it. Above all, we need try to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. One set of voices cry that sex is a lust of our lower nature, that it's a mean and nasty and ugly thing, and you only do it with somebody you love. It's a base necessity of procreation, of reproduction. Then we have the voices who cry for more and more sex, who bewail the institution of marriage, who think that most of the troubles of the race are traceable to sex causes. Remember, we're not talking about the act. We're talking about the attitude. We're talking about how we think about these things, not what we do, with who we do, nothing. I guess I probably should have said this before I started the paragraph. Um, I think that the primary difference between man and all the other members of the animal kingdom is that we have choice. We have self-will. We're not governed by instincts when it comes to that. Most animals are governed by God tells them this is the time of the season or what have you, that this is what you do and you do it for procreation. But we make choices. We decide when we want to have it. We decide with whom you're going to have it. We decide how many times, if you can handle it, how many times you're going to have it. We decide how many positions you can have it in. The point being, we make choices. And it should be evident by this page in our recovery, by all the way up onto page 69. And I don't know, am I being a little too cute when I wonder why everything about sex is on page 69 in the book? Well, it is. In any case, by the time I've gotten to this point, I've recognized that some of my choices are not made properly, that I have a defective thinking process. And so that if we're going to take a look at the way we viewed sex that sets us apart from the other members of the animal kingdom, we have to bear in mind that we make choices. We think about these things. So remember, we're going to be talking about the attitude, our thinking towards it, not the act. We're not interested in that. And he goes further. He points that out at the top of page 69. They see its significance everywhere. One school would allow man no flavor for his fare. The other would have us on a straight pepper diet, hot and spicy. Actually, someone gave me this T-shirt once, straight pepper diet, page 69. Thank you, hon. But you thought I didn't have that anymore. Okay, continuing. We want to stay out of this controversy. Please underline that. We want to stay out of this controversy. And let's highlight the rest of this paragraph. We don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. Arbiter just means judge. We don't want to judge anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't. What can we do about it? That's what counts. What can we do about it? Now, again, we're not going to get into what might or might not be acceptable. We're not going to tell anyone how to conduct their sex life. It comes down to, like I said, if we have perhaps harmed some people by the choices we made in every aspect, whether it's sex or anything else, maybe we've harmed some people in that regard. And that's what we're going to try and look at. The thinking that might have led to our hurting people as a result of the Sex Act. So let's continue. Here's some of the directions. I'm going to suggest you highlight the whole next paragraph, beginning with we reviewed our own sex conduct over the years. Give you a second to do that. We reviewed our own, and you may want to please underline our own, not anyone else's, our own sex conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish? Please underline that. Dishonest, let's underline that. Inconsiderate, let's underline that. And next to that, please write column 5, because here we do have 5 columns. So we reviewed our list. We have a column for where had we been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate. There are a few other words we'll add to that appear in other parts of the book. But then the next instruction is, and underline this, please, whom had we hurt? And above that, please write column 1. There's the name that goes in column 1. Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy? Please underline jealousy, underline suspicion, underline bitterness. And next to that, write column 4. Where were we at fault? What should we have done and said? Where were we at fault is column 3, incidentally. What should we have done instead is column 4. We got this all down on paper and looked at it. Now, Bill is going to give us 6 considerations. Things he says that we put it on paper and we looked at it. Looked at it is just another word for saying we considered it. So he's going to give us 6 considerations in the next couple of paragraphs that can help us think about those things. So he says, in this way, which is these columns that we're talking about, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. An ideal is just a standard. It's a model, something that a goal we would strive for, actually. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Please underline that. Please highlight that. And the second part of it, was it selfish or not? Underline it twice, please. And above that, write column 3. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. We subjected each test to this test. Was it selfish or not? We ask God, this is in pink, please. We ask God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. I forgot to tell you in the previous line where it says we subjected each test to this we subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? Please, next to that, write the words, the criteria. How do we know what names go on the list? There has to be some criteria that we apply. We're not going to be putting down everybody we may have had any kind of sexual relationship with, or may have been affected by a sexual relationship we had. We're being given some very specific directions as to how to choose the names that go in column 1. And here's the first direction. Was it selfish or not? Now, in order for me to answer that question, I need to know what do you mean by selfish? And that's why I suggested you write column 3 above that, because column 3 is going to contain those basic instincts of life that may have caused us to act the way that we did. I'll come back to it. Just trust me for a minute. So we subjected each relation to this test. We asked God to mold our ideals and help us live up to them. And please highlight the rest of this paragraph. We remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised or loathed. Please underline that last sentence, neither to be despised or loathed. God never gives us anything bad. Now, I'm going to express an opinion here, and it is just that. It's an opinion. I know it was Joe and Charlie's opinion because that's who taught it to me. I'm pretty sure it's Bill's opinion because the evidence seems to jump off this page. But let me just tell you what that opinion is. I believe that God gave us the sex urge, the sex instinct, for 2, maybe 3 reasons. 1, so we could reproduce. Said it at the beginning of this page, a base need of procreation. If man didn't reproduce, there would be no society. So he gave us this instinct for reproduction. But I'm also convinced that he made it a very pleasurable thing to do. So we would go through what we needed to go through to experience it. So he gave it to us for reasons of reproduction and, I believe, mutual satisfaction. And I'm going to change one of those words, satisfaction, mutual intimacy. Intimacy. And that doesn't limit us, incidentally, to the sex act. It's possible to be intimate and not involve the sex act at all. But I believe God gave us the sex instinct for two basic reasons: reproduction, and that it would be mutually pleasurable, mutually intimate. So that means if I'm using the sex act for any other reason besides reproduction and mutual satisfaction, then I am using it for some other purpose, some other selfish purpose. Maybe I'm having this relationship or engaging in this relationship because I want to be able to boast about it. You know, what we call John Wayne syndrome. So you can boast about your conquests. So you're not doing it for reproduction. You're not doing it for mutual satisfaction because you don't care about the other person. You're doing it for reasons of self-esteem, to feel better about yourself. You may be using it for some other things. Andy, if you'll give me the grid, maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. The 68-4 grid. And basically what I'm trying to draw your attention to is that before we put the names in column 1, for who did I hurt, let's go to the bottom of the page and look at the criteria. Criteria. Oop, there we go. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? So that raises the question of, well, what do you mean by selfish? Let's go to column 3, up to the top of the page, Andy, if you would. And here are the manifestations of self that we're referring to. Did I engage in this activity? Well, like I said, to build my self-esteem or pride so I could boast to the guys on the corner about my conquests, usually all made up anyway, but it doesn't matter. It's not for reproduction. It's not for mutual satisfaction. It is for pride and for self-esteem, maybe even emotional security. Remember, there are 3 types of security: emotional, financial, physical. So did I engage in this activity maybe for emotional security? I'm lonely. I need somebody in my life like that. I'm not comfortable with the sex act or particular sex acts, but I go along with it because I need that person in my life. I'm lonely. It's an emotional security. It has nothing to do with reproduction, has nothing to do with mutual satisfaction, and everything to do with emotional security. How about financial or physical security? And I don't know that this is too controversial, but I think this is more of an issue to women than it is to men, that if they don't perform a certain act that they're being asked to or expected to or demanded to, that they might get beaten, that they might get cut off financially. So that has nothing to do with reproduction, certainly has nothing to do with mutual satisfaction, and everything to do with physical security so you don't get hurt, or financial security so you don't get cut out financially, right? These are selfish reasons. These are not reproduction and mutual satisfaction. How about ambitions? You women are better at this than we men, but to control a relationship, to withhold. Like I said, women are better at that than men. But the point is, it has nothing to do with reproduction and nothing to do with mutual satisfaction and everything to do with controlling or getting something you want. Using sex as a way to get something you want in or out of a relationship. Personal relations. Once again, I'm lonely. I need somebody in my life. I'm not comfortable with what they want to do, but it's better than not having anybody. So I participate in it. And it has nothing to do with reproduction or mutual satisfaction, and everything to do with personal relations and emotional security, and maybe even financial or physical security. And we, at the bottom of the column, I kind of define some of those terms. Self-esteem is how I feel about me. Pride is how I think the world thinks about me. Emotional security is just a general sense of well-being. And ambitions, my ability to accomplish things. So that's how we know what goes in column one. So before we put a name in column one, we ask ourselves, was it for selfish reasons or reproductive reasons? If it was selfish, which one? Was it for pride, self-esteem, etc.? So we put the name down in column one. Then we put the cause in column three. What basic instinct was motivating it? It wasn't reproduction. It wasn't mutual satisfaction. And then we go back to column two. Very briefly, what did you do? What did you do that caused harm in this situation? By doing what you did in column three, you caused harm to the person in column one. What is it that you did? Goes in column two. And then it tells us what feelings did it create in others. We just read, did it unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, anger, fear, bitterness? Now, that doesn't mean we've necessarily asked that person, gee, how did you feel about that? No, put yourself in their shoes. How would you feel if you were put in that same position? We're trying to establish some empathy for others. Well, how would you feel if you had to face that situation? What should I have done instead? Now, that's always going to be simply the opposite of what I did. But we remember, we're trying to shape a new attitude towards a future sex life from this point on. So we need to be mindful of the fact that what we did, we shouldn't do again. There's a couple of words I put down at the bottom of the page that aren't in the big book, aren't in the 12 and 12. And therefore, if you like, you want to be pedantic about it, you can leave them out. But they're words that came up in a couple of hundred fifth steps that I've done over the years. And I think the words are very fitting for things that feelings we create in other people. Don't we create insecurity when we do that? Don't we create confusion, frustration, sadness? How about embarrassment in front of other people? How about hurt? These are things that we create by our actions. So, column four is what feelings did we create in others? And the last column is the money column, as always. What mistake did we make? Were we frightened? Were we irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-seeking, judgmental? These words in column five, if you remember, the stuff in column five for the sex harms, the stuff in column four for the angers inventory, those are the wrongs we're going to talk about in step five. Those are the defects of character we're going to look at in step six. And those are the shortcomings we're going to ask God to convert into assets in the seventh step. That fifth column, that final column, is the money column. You cannot burn your fourth step without making a copy of it because you're going to need this information for that. Actually, what you may want to do is above column one, you may want to write steps 8 and 9 because that's where you're going to go back to when we get to steps 8 and 9. One of the things we're going to do is look at the people we hurt as a result of the sex act. So we're going back to this column, column one. And if I burned it, I'm out of luck. And then above columns 4 and 5, you may want to write steps 5, 6, and 7, because that's where we're going to get that information. So when Bill said on the previous page that when we turn back to the list to add that last column in the angers, he said it held the key to the future. It holds the key to the future of our step work, and it holds the key to the future of our life at this point on. The ideals that we want to, the morals that we want to pursue, all comes out of the work that we did on these grids. So we can't burn them. And if you're going to burn them, ceremonial, whatever, symbolically, make a copy. You've got to have a copy of this in order to proceed. So you can take that down, Andy. And let's take a look at the bottom of 69. God alone. Oh, I'm sorry. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must, for those of you who say there are no musts in the book, there's another one. This page says it's a very musty book, so let's circle or highlight it in green. We must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm. That just reminds me, I left something out I wanted to cover. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we don't bring harm to others in doing so. Still more harm to others. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. Please highlight the rest of this paragraph in pink. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come, and please underline, if we want it. And I want to take a pause here because I forgot something that I forgot last week, and I didn't want to go through forgetting it again this week. I want to go back to page 67. We've covered most of the sex inventory anyway. We're going to go back to the angers inventory. On page 67 at the top is what many people refer to as the sick man's prayer. It says, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick person. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. I can't tell you how many times I've been done inventories, fifth steps with people, where in the anger list, there's not necessarily just a name like Andrew. It's asshole Andrew. Or it doesn't say Bill. It says Bill the bastard. Or it says angry Andy. There's always that term before some people, that you just hate and hate down to your deepest soul, that you just can't let go of that hate to the point where you even put that descriptive name, adjective on your inventory. So what I suggest to people when they do that is, instead of it saying Ed the asshole or Bill the angry Bill or whatever, how about changing those words to sick? Sick Bill, sick Ed, sick Andy. We're starting to try to look at the people who harmed us as being sick in self too. That's what this just told us. That one of our basic instincts was hurt or threatened when they stepped on that toe. So that toe, that instinct became hypersensitized to us. But someone did it to us because one of their basic instincts was out of proportion and led them to do what they did. It helps me to look at the things that happened to me less as a victim. I just happened to be caught in the shield, in the area of the explosion. It wasn't aimed at me, I just got caught in it. It wasn't directed at me. And so if I look at that person and say, this is a sick person, God help me from being angry. Now, I think that works all the time. And I think it's not a bad idea to switch the description on the name, but if you don't do it, you don't do it. But I want to suggest something else. If you have your fourth edition, because it's not in the study edition, if we go to the fourth edition, I want to go to page 551. The story is called Freedom from Bondage. The story is Win Laws is the person's name. This is a friend of Bill's, and we'll leave it at that. But Win Quorum Laws was her name. And it's a very interesting story for how to get rid of resentments that we don't think we can ever get past. I don't know about you, but I've run into that plenty of times in fifth steps. I just can't get past this. I can't let go of it. I can't. Well, you may want to change that word to won't, because when you're willing, you'll find a way. And so let's take a look at this particular story, Freedom from Bondage. First, let's get the setup. On page 551, she says, I've had many spiritual experiences since I've been in the program. Many I didn't recognize right away. So I'm slow to learn, and they take many guises. But one was so outstanding, I like to pass it on whenever I can, in the hope that it'll help someone else as it has me. As I said earlier, self-pity and resentment were my constant companions, and my inventory began to look like a 33-year diary, for I seemed to have a resentment against everybody I'd ever known. Anyone identify with that? He just list is endless. Okay, let's save time. All but one responded to the treatment suggested in the steps immediately, but this one posed a problem. The resentment was against my mother, and it was 25 years old. I fed it, fanned it, nurtured it. Does that not sound like harbored it, allowed it, felt victimized, had expectations? It's the have will list. She's describing how she's carrying that resentment long after the actual event. She gave it safe haven. She fed it. She fanned it. She nourished it as one might a delicate child. It had become as much a part of me as my breathing. It had provided me with excuses. There's a great word. Excuses for my lack of education, my marital failures, personal failures, inadequacy, and of course, my alcoholism. And though I really thought I'd be willing to part with it, now I knew I was reluctant to let it go. One morning, however, I realized I had to get rid of it, for my reprieve was running out. And if I didn't get rid of it, I was going to get drunk. And I didn't want to get drunk anymore. And please, if you're highlighting it, highlight this in pink. In my prayers that morning, I asked God to point out to me some way to be free of this resentment. And next to it, you may want to write the prayer portion of step 11. She began her day by asking God to show her how to be free of this resentment. That is the first part of the 11th step, sought through prayer. And we're about to run into the other half in a moment. So in the morning, she asked that question. During the day, a friend of mine brought me some magazines to take to a hospital group I was interested in. She was doing volunteer work at a hospital, so she brings magazines. When I did work at rehabs, I'd always bring a stack of magazines. I used to subscribe to all kinds of nonsense and bring it to the rehab. Most of the time, they wouldn't let me use them. They don't like Rolling Stone and that kind of stuff. But the point is, she was bringing magazines to the hospital. I looked through them. A banner across one featured an article by a prominent clergyman in which, and please highlight this, I caught the word resentment. And next to it, let's write the meditation part of step 11. She asked for the direction. Somebody hands her a stack of magazines, and right on the top is an article by a noted clergyman, and I'll tell you who that is in a minute. And on the cover, it has the word resentment. Is it odd or is it God? Continuing, he said, in effect, and this is what she gathered from the article, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you'll pay for the person, I'm sorry, if you will pray for the person or thing you resent, you will be free. If you'll ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't even mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day, and please cross out the next 3 words for 2 weeks. Because in my book, it doesn't say 2 weeks. In the recovery portion of the text, the first 164 pages, it says, if I pray for something and I have the willingness, those things will come to me. So this notion of 2 weeks, I think, is unrealistic. It may be 2 days, it may be 2 weeks, it may be 2 months, it may be 2 years, it may be 2 decades. Because that's what the recovery portion of my book tells me. This is a personal story. The recovery portion of the book tells me that I pray for something until it comes. And then if it doesn't, I pray for the willingness. And then I pray for the willingness to have the willingness. And I think you get the point. So eliminate that time period. Do it every day, period. And you'll find you've come to mean it and to want it for them. And you realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. It worked for me then, and it has worked for me many times since. And it will work for me every time I'm willing to work for it. See, it even says it in this part of the book. It works every time, as long as you're willing to do it. Sometimes I have to first ask for the willingness. Gee, sounds like she read the big book, huh? But it too always comes. Doesn't say 2 weeks. It always comes. And because it works for me, it will work for all of us. Andy, if you'll put up 526, one of the things that I gave you in the email, the handouts today, was the suggestion for resentments we feel we cannot let go of, which is basically the prayer that I just read you from that magazine. There it is. Now, I mentioned before where this came from. The quote was from an article written by Norman Vincent Peale, Peale. I may be showing my age because I know who the guy is. Maybe some of you younger people might or might not, but he was a very noted, very respected clergyman, and not in the sense of Jimmy Swaggart and Tammy Faye Baker and all of these other fake phonies and frauds. That's just outside issue, so I take that back. The point being, he was a very well-respected clergyman. And you can take that down, Andy. And he wrote a number of books, one of which was called A Guide to Confident Living. Now, I have 2 copies of this book. I have an original first edition, and I have a current edition. They are quite different. They've been heavily edited. So where it appears in one book, in the first edition, the references that the article is not the exact thing as that, I'm sorry, what's in the book is not the exact wording that was in the article. He changed it when he put it in the book, but it says the same thing. In the first edition, in my book, it's on page 122. If you have a current edition, you may find it closer to page 123 or 157. Because there are 2 stories in here that look very similar to that. But either way, couldn't hurt to read the whole book. Norman Vincent Peale's A Guide to Confident Living. He wrote that article that appeared in that magazine that when quorum laws read on that day, and it relieved her of her obsession, her resentment rather, towards her mother. Is it odd or is it God? If we ask for it, it will come. You know, one of the things that I learned in doing this inventory is, you know, we very sometimes refer to the 4th step as, you know, the first step is the first 2 steps are conclusions of the mind, and the 3rd step is very much another conclusion of the mind. It's a decision, and the 4th step is a written step. And it's not a written step. Step 4 is a collection, a set of 3 things: directions, considerations, and promises. It gives us a set of directions. It tells us what to do. Do this, make this list, add this column. So it gives us directions. It then gives us considerations or conditions, if you will, that we must meet in order for these sheets to make any sense. And the 3rd part is a set of promises or prayers about the end result of doing this inventory. So basically, the 4th step is not a written step. It is a step that is a collection of directions, considerations, and promises that involve writing. There's a difference there. It is a set of directions to follow, considerations we must meet, and prayers and promises of the end result. All of that involves writing. Not just writing. That might be writing your life story out. And maybe that's where some of that nonsense comes from. But I heard someone talk about that at a workshop once, and it made perfect sense to me. So I'm passing it along. My friend California Rob taught me that, actually. But it makes perfect sense. It really does. Everything in the 4th step is a makeup of directions, considerations, and promises. And we're going to stop there. We got a few minutes left if there's anyone want to share